introduction and then, you know, give you a moment if you'd like to say something to everyone. Senator Dunnavant is a native of Virginia. She was elected to the Virginia State Senate in 2015. Her initiatives include reforms to improve education, healthcare, the economy, and the environment. She's also a medical doctor in OBGYN and is the only medical doctor serving in the Virginia Senate. She has been in private practice for 20 years and has been working on innovation in patient care and also reducing risk. So please, everyone, welcome Senator Dunnavant.
Good morning. Now, you guys were so generous as to send me a list of questions. Do you want to have somebody ask those questions, or you want me to kind of use those as prompts as we go along?
What I usually do is I will kind of go through them with you and it'll serve as a conversation. But thank you for saying that, because I do want to remind everyone that this is a conversation. So questions are welcome. You can either put them in the chat. Brian Congrove is going to let us know when we do have a chat that we need to stop for a moment, and you can also raise your hand. And you can put up an emoji from your reactions, and we'll try to keep up with all that. Brian does a great job with that. So other than that, we'll just kind of roll along. Would you like to say something before we get started, Senator Dunnavant?
Well, thank you so much for having me. I think I've been with you once before when we could be there in person, but it's been a little while. But I am so grateful for what you do to the community. I loved catching the tail end of your conversation that you have new businesses that have joined already. Thrilled to hear that for our economy. It's really been a tough year, and so we need our business leaders more than ever, because you are the subject matter experts of what we need to do to protect and kind of reignite our economy. So thank you for all that you do, and I hope you know I am easy access. You can get to me by an email. Ideas are most welcome.
Okay, well, thank you, and we'll try to put that in the chat at some point during the event. In fact, actually, I have your email, so if it's the same one, I can just put it right in the chat. I want to give you an opportunity to tell us, and when I hear, Dr. Dunnavant and I hear Senator Dunnavant, I think, oh my gosh, what does your calendar look like? Would you share with us why you decided to run for public office with already such an auspicious career in medicine?
Thank you. I would say that probably the most important reason I ran for office is that it was a way for me to be a part of finding better solutions. And I think it's something my mother embedded in me, and that is, complaining is useless. And if you want to make things better, you have to be willing to put your shoulder to the effort. And so I personally have been affected by a lot of legislation in my business and in my practice. And I, meet with 120 women every week who are frustrated and share with me those frustrations about their health insurance, about their children, about education, about their families' challenges, about employment, about health insurance. And I felt like these were the kinds of things that needed to be heard at the legislature, and that maybe if I had a seat at the table, I could have some influence in better decisions being made.
Well, that's what each and every one of us needs to consider, right? At least vote, but you went the full extent, and we appreciate that. And so, of course, being a senator and a medical doctor, that uniquely positions you to discuss what we have in mind today. And we're going to talk about COVID-19 data, and we're going to talk about your thoughts on the need for in-person schools for students. And so I think you just covered this, but since you've been a senator, do you find that the intersection of your two careers actually helps you in having a particularly beneficial perspective on those two worlds?
I think it does. And I think that after now being there 5 years, that the decisions that we make in the legislature influence so many people in so many different ways. And as a physician, I'm always thinking, what are the consequences of a decision that I make? What might happen next? What's the next domino? I think that's an important perspective to have in the legislature. And when you have people from diverse life experiences that come to solve the problems of a diverse population, those different perspectives are invaluable to making better decisions with fewer long-term unintended consequences. So I think not only the fact that I come from a medical arena with subject matter expertise to talk about that all-important issue that we have and we deal with all the time in the legislature, but the way I approach problems is very, very different. It's very analytical, it's very diagnostic based, it's very much collecting large volumes of data up front so that I make sure I have the opportunity to look at all the variables before I start editing and focusing on the variables that I might have to act on. So I do think sometimes it's disruptive to my fellow senators, but it's mostly very much valued by them. And I think for me, one of the biggest challenges I've had at the legislature is that I look at things organically, how they all interrelate. And the state works in silos based on agency determination and funding. And we are, in my opinion, unable to do a good job of accomplishing the goals we've set in a modern society without being interconnected in a more organic way. But it is like moving mountains to get bureaucratic structure to change and interrelate. But I've spent a lot of time in a lot of different places trying to make that work.
Oh, you know, that's really brings us to our next point, because I feel like when you talk about silos, I think we found ourselves, even as individuals, in silos, and we are bombarded by so much information, especially now with in a pandemic. You know, depends on the news station, depends on the source, and all of this data is so confusing, I know, to me. And then it doesn't take much to stand up and pull up to a conversation with someone where they have a completely different perspective. And that doesn't mean they're wrong or I'm wrong or anyone's wrong, but it is also very confusing. Why do we have so many different perspectives on something that it seems to be, it's a scientific issue, it's a health issue, but how do we deal with this, and how do we come to this, I guess, is the question as well.
And this is never before has there been an intersection in my two different arenas that was so, I think, much of an imperative as it has been for me as a physician and a leader and a legislator to be able to interpret. That's what physicians do. Physicians have a large number of studies and volumes and evidence and best practices that we review and we apply to a situation, but we tease out that situation to get the right details in order to apply that volume of data in the most appropriate way. And so we are data interpreters, we are evidence interpreters. And so that's something I've done a lot of in this past year. I've spent a lot of time on Facebook Lives explaining things. And this data is so incredibly frustrating for me, because I think it has taken a political twist and turn to support a narrative that is either easier for the media to report, sells more newspapers, or speaks to a particular political agenda. And it is not being challenged in a way that it should be. And just something that I think resonates with everybody, because you guys deal with data, you guys deal with evidence. I hear this tinging, let me turn this off. You guys deal with this all the time. Data can be misapplied any way you want it, and you can make an argument relying on data. But when data and critical thinking and evidence lines up in a simple and clearly evident way, there's a resonance that you're on the right track. And that's why people are so frustrated now, is that you have not been given access or perspective on how to look at the data in a way that you can actually do critical thinking and make decisions that are beneficial. So for instance, let's talk about schools, because I know we're going to get there anyway. The data shows us unequivocally that children are far less likely to be ill if they get COVID virus. They also do not transmit it to older age groups very effectively. They're not effective vectors like they are for other things like the flu. We have schools being closed because teachers are worried about the children being a vector, or schools being a source of exposure that causes an outbreak. The data doesn't support that. Child care centers have been open since the beginning of COVID. 50% of our child care centers were open. We had almost no outbreaks at child care centers. We now have private schools open all over Virginia, no outbreaks. We have public schools open in some cases. There was just an article in the newspaper this weekend that spoke to Chesapeake having 100 cases in the Chesapeake schools. None of those cases were gotten in the school when they did the contact tracing. They were gotten in the community. So the science supports that there is not an undue risk to children or the people around them, especially if you take precautions related to COVID. But the decisions we've made have not been based on that good science. In fact, it's so compelling that the American Academy of Pediatrics came out last summer and said, whatever you do, open schools. Because the risk for children of not being in school is far greater than the risk of COVID. But look at all the parameters the state has provided, and even the federal government, for how you open schools. It's about community load of the virus. That's not relevant to children. We've just gone over the data that makes sense, that's been supported again and again, that they are not as at risk for any community spread when they're in schools. But that is how we've decided to keep the schools closed. And it's a mistake because we're failing to look at what I call composite data. And when you look at that composite data, you aren't looking down a silo at COVID alone and saying, this is the risk of COVID, therefore we must protect our children and close the schools. You have to open that scale, and you have to put the risk of COVID for children weighted against the other risks for children. And you are now seeing what we knew was going to happen, that there's an absolute surge. We know that in the general public, there's a surge of suicides from drugs, which is a testimony to where we are with mental health, that is masked by us being not in community settings. We know that that's true for children too, and it's a crisis. And schools provide a screening opportunity for children, an interventional opportunity for children who are in crises or have been abused. We know that the risk of abuse is up. We have 42% of our children that are that qualify for free and reduced lunch, which means they're at 125% of the poverty level, often with any parent in the home working, and they need food support. We're working really hard to make sure they get that, but they don't have the safety support they have when they're in a bricks and mortar in-person school setting. So if you weight all of that risk and many more, you've seen the failure rates. Chesapeake kids are failing, especially the K to 8 age group. Fairfax schools, failure rates are escalating. The educational losses that we're having, we have been particularly insensitive to the risk to children that are lower income, and it's egregious. And if you put those things on a scale, the scale would absolutely weight in favor of opening the schools. So you really have to be able to look at all of the data and have that conversation. And when you do, you go, it's like the light bulb. Of course that makes sense.
Yes, and it's frustrating because it should be based on data. It should be based on the hard facts that we know. And unfortunately, we have, speaking of news stations, and I was in news for many years, so it's all part of one big problem. But if you can change a station or a network and find a completely different conversation with regard to something that is affecting our health in such a significant way, then it's hard I'm sure for you to make any kind of ground on making the basis data when it's so much rooted in conversation, in individual, opinions, in political views. Don't know
and
how
fear
we got
tactic.
there.
Yeah, I don't either. And it is a shame because I think that it's uncomfortable to have uncertainty, but data makes, again, a composite picture. So if you have data that challenges, let's say, for instance, there's great science to support the increase in cases that we're seeing now is not a new, scary, uncontrollable, unpredictable spike, but the normal change of viral load with seasonality. When we go indoors, that's why you get your flu shot in September, October, because this is the season that we usually see all of the hospital admissions for flu. There's virtually no flu out there. Coronavirus has replaced the flu as the virus that is hospitalizing people and making them sick. But the idea that people get sick at this time of year is absolutely not new. So if you start applying some of the, you only can look and predict the future by looking at evidence that might be relevant from the past. And when you look at viral loads and you look at the expression of the illness that we've seen, you look at the regionality, you're not seeing the spike of coronavirus in the same regions we saw it in the spring because they've developed some immunity. You're now seeing in other places that didn't have much virus then. So there's a lot of science here that is available, but we can't seem to get it into conversation, and that's challenging. But that's not just the media, that's the state, that's the data we have, that's the way the data is presented. You never present something as non-relevant as the number of positive tests. We want to know how many people are dying from this. The positive tests are subject to how many tests you're doing, to many other things. Are the positive tests all in 20-year-olds? Because that's a far different story than they're all in 70-year-olds. So there's a lot of curtailing data that we are not getting. And what we are getting, because it just seems uncertain, is very scary. So it is a challenge.
Well, you mentioned scary. So yes, that is true. I know a few people maybe who say they had the flu, but it does seem to be replaced. Is it because COVID-19, part of the issue is that it's a novel? I know there have been other coronaviruses over the years. So is it because it's a novel virus that has never impacted or had human contact before? Is that what makes it so dangerous?
I think it's a couple of things. I think the reason it's so dangerous is that some people, and we have a relatively good idea of who those people are, they're usually people that have other morbid, other illnesses that are at risk. But some people who get this particular coronavirus get the inflammatory lung response called SARS. And once your lungs swell and become inflamed, it is incredibly hard to treat you. And that is when the death rate goes high, which is why we need to track ICU rates, ICU hospitalizations, intubation rates. Those are the people, if you look across time, even though we have a lot more people sick now, we don't have nearly as many people in the ICUs or on ventilators as we did when we first saw the introduction of this virus. So coronaviruses are incredibly contagious. Think about colds. They are some of the most contagious viruses that exist. We just don't always test for colds. But now we're testing anybody that has cold symptoms. If we were only looking at people who were hospitalized or who were in the ICU, this would look like a much smaller number. But yes, they're pervasive. These viruses are incredibly pervasive and easily spread. And when you're closed indoors like we are now, that's what causes seasonality. We're touching doorknobs, we're picking it up. And, you know, I would say to everybody, one of the most important things we need to do right now is get back to our upgraded cleaning. I think we all kind of fell off when we got into the summer and things fell back. This is the time to make sure your doorknobs are clean, you're not touching your face, because if you don't get that virus into you, you're not going to get exposed. But it's mostly that it's just so highly contagious, and it has a particularly bad twist for certain people that's deadly and horrifying.
Okay, well that really helps, and I'm glad you said the thing about cleaning, because there have been other stories about that too. No, you can't get it from a surface. You can get it from I haven't touched a doorknob in most of my adult life, and people always think I'm so weird because I'm using my shirt sleeve or something. Vindicated. I still may be a bit, you know, weird, but at least it works. So let's talk about those cases you mentioned. You know, the danger of, or how contagious it is. And I pulled some data. This was a few days ago. 73.6 million cases in the world. Almost 500,000 a day, or today. That was the other day. In the U.S., 16.8 million. We're growing by 202,000 cases a day, according to this data. Virginia, 288,000 cases with 4,500 deaths. Would you decipher that a bit for us?
I would say that is the part of the data that is indecipherable. And I asked the legislature to look at, well, it depends upon what you want to do. Do you want to look at cumulative numbers? I mean, that's scary data, right? If you want to intimidate and scare people, this is scary. If you want to say, how do I make decisions about what I do and where I go? I would say that the first thing is this data is way more helpful when you put it out over time, because you begin to look for patterns. And if you look at the patterns, there was a huge incidence of positive people in the beginning, followed with lines with death and with hospitalization, which has fallen off and has been very indolent until recently when we got back to seasonality. But even now, as we spike with more cases in the general public and in the community, we have an increase from what it has been in the past few weeks for ICU and hospital admissions and ventilators and deaths, but really a very low level compared to the beginning of the virus. So you have to apply this data over time to understand what the patterns are and where we're going. And if you just talk about raw numbers, it seems like you can't even wrap your head around it. But it's really very different to say where we are now compared to where we are. All viral epidemics, all epidemics have an epidemic portion and then an endemic portion, where it's going, you know, you kind of have a little, you have some herd immunity, you have some, but you're never going to have it completely go away. And you might have spikes, but you have to say, what are the variables that cause those spikes? Is it unpredictable? What's happening? Is it people misbehaving? Are they not wearing their masks? Well, probably it's seasonality. So data like this isn't helpful unless you can apply an understanding of patterns about why it is what it is and can we predict what it's going to be in the future. That's why the World Health Organization came out and said shutting down businesses is not going to help you. The evidence has shown us that businesses are not where people catch it. And you are now, back to the scale, you are now putting your citizens in jeopardy of economic disaster. And you've got to think about all of those things. So wearing masks may or may not work. There's a huge debate about that. I don't care if it works or not. It's what we have. And it does make some common sense. If you're not spitting when you're talking to somebody, you're less likely to drop virus somewhere. Let's all just get on the bandwagon and wear them. Let's clean the services. Let's get the vaccine. God bless this season of hope and light. All of the religions start looking at, you know, seasons of light coming. And here we have a vaccine coming.
Yeah, absolutely. It does give us some hope. You mentioned something I'd like to circle back to. You mentioned that, and we do see that with some of the Midwest states, they're having a spike where they didn't have it earlier on when everyone else was being affected. So is it really true that if I get not me, Joe Schmo, if someone gets the COVID-19, that they will have an embedded immunity to get it again?
Yes, and you know, the way that immunity works and the way the vaccine works is that your body gets exposed to proteins that are alien, unusual, and your body creates antibodies that whenever they see that protein again, they will go and kill it before it has a chance to get in your cells and cause an infection. It is unknown at this point in time how perfect that immunity is. There are some reports, just like you can get the chickenpox vaccine and still get chickenpox. You can get chickenpox twice. It's just incredibly unusual. And so, yes, the immunity is imperfect, but it is true. Once you, in fact, you've probably heard that people who have had the virus and recovered are donating plasma with antibodies in it, because giving that pre-prepared immune army in your antibodies and injecting it to somebody who's infected means that the invading proteins are killed immediately based on their borrowed antibodies, while their body has a chance to build your own. It takes several days and up to 3 weeks to build first advanced antibodies, and memory antibodies take about 12 weeks ideally to build.
Wow. So I actually didn't put this in the question, so forgive me for throwing in a new question, but you made me think of something. So just to create some relevance, my mother got Guillain-Barré after a flu vaccine, rather, years and years ago. And I was told never to get the flu shot because of that, you know, because of genetics and so on and so forth. Will you get the vaccine, and what is your opinion on its safety and the way people might react. I know we don't have much data on that, right? We just started, people just started getting the vaccine, but could you give us any perspective on that?
I got my first one this morning.
Oh, well,
I
yay.
did. And so this is an interesting vaccine. It's an incredibly safe vaccine. There's lots of testing that's been done on it. And so when you get vaccines for some things like measles, mumps, rubella, those are live vaccines, and they actually elicit a minor immune response in your body. You might remember old polio shots caused a polio blister on the arm because you actually got a little bit of the illness and you responded by creating the antibodies. The flu shot gives you some of the viral capsule so that you work with that. This shot uses messenger RNA. And this is really sophisticated. Messenger RNA is a little piece of your DNA that functions as a messenger to build proteins. And it builds proteins that your cells then put on their surface that your immune system recognizes as the coronavirus proteins, and you build an immunity to it without ever having the virus in you. So it's a really clever virus. It's a really clever vaccine, and it's very effective. And it is 95% effectiveness is amazing in a vaccine. And so I would encourage everybody to get it. The side effects are no more common or dramatic than they are from other vaccines. You can't really count local soreness. And listen, when you get a shot, you do this with your arms. Every 15 minutes or hour, the first day or two, your arm won't even hurt. Exercise the muscle you got it in, and it won't even hurt. So there are some people that there have been anaphylactic reactions. That's true. You know, it's less likely, I'd say, than your likelihood of getting hit by a bus to have one of the anaphylactic reactions to this shot. So these are very minor reactions. The value is so much more immense than the risk.
That's really good perspective. So valuable.
You are special, and I don't know about the Guillain-Barré. That is special for vaccines, and would have to find out and make sure you could get this vaccine with the suspension, but your doctors will be able to look at that.
Okay. Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. I will definitely do some research on that. I do.
Actually, Yvonne, I
Yes.
asked Dr. Varay, who is the deputy director for the health department in Henrico, that specific question the other day ago. And formerly, I don't know when your mother got the shot, in 1976 with the swine flu, there were many cases of Guillain-Barré. But more recently, they've been able to, whatever's in the vaccine has been changed. And she indicated that you shouldn't get that. However, the H1N1 virus shots, from the H1N1 is bird flu, I think. Anyway, a few years ago, they had other reactions. But if your mother has that reaction, you just tell the physician or whomever it is that's giving you the shot. They may be able to advise you of that, because, as you know, some people have allergic reactions to eggs, and they used to put the vaccine in eggs and that sort of thing. So just ask the question, okay?
Thank you, Pat. I appreciate it. I was going to pause and give Senator Dunnavant a chance to field some questions. We have a question from Peter Larson that says, asking you, Senator Dunnavant, if you would address the current trend toward anti-vax.
Sorry, I had a low battery. I have to switch my iPad around so I can get you on here. Give me just a second.
Okay, no worries.
There we go. No, I can't explain it. It's beyond reason for me. We had quite a dramatic, kind of conversation at the legislature last year. There are people who feel very strongly that vaccines are detrimental to their health. And, there's a lot of debate, and debating the science wouldn't get us necessarily to a conclusion we could all agree on. But the problem comes up when those vaccinations are mandated for something. And the conversation last year was that we wanted the CDC to be able to use their guidelines. Virginia had included in their code the list of vaccines that were required to attend school. It referenced the CDC making the ultimate decision of what was necessary, but only those listed in the code were actually required. So that means that you have politicians going back every year trying to decide what vaccines kids should get. That's really not the realm of policy. It's the realm of healthcare. And so we changed the code to say that the CDC would decide what the vaccinations were, but a lot of people didn't trust the CDC. So the bottom line is, in Virginia, the only time you really have required vaccines are if you want to attend public school. And the reason that is the case is because, again, this goes back to the conversation about vaccines not causing 100% immunity, because you can still get a virus after you've been vaccinated. You need to have what's called herd immunity. And if you don't have enough people in the population vaccinated, you can have an outbreak of an illness, and even kids who have been vaccinated can get it. So the idea is that as a public safety issue, we need to have enough herd immunity at our schools. Now, in Virginia, you have a religious exception, and you can say, I'm not going to get my children vaccinated because of a religious or a medical reason, and that's okay with the schools. But we just want to make sure that everybody knows this is the right thing to do. Don't forget to do it. We need to have herd immunity because all of our children need to be protected.
Yeah, thank you so much for addressing that. Next question we have, you're being asked to address the concern that many have on how quickly the vaccine has been released, with most vaccines taking 5 to 7 years to release. That's another question we've had.
And I would say that what has been abbreviated is the red tape that you've all heard about at the FDA and in the process of approving medications in general. But the testing that has been done, certainly the pharmaceutical companies had less lag time in between different phases, but there has been due diligence. I would say the only shortcoming is that when you test over many, many, many years, you collect data over many, many, many years, and we don't have that now. But this is well-established science with a very safe modality using messenger RNA instead of introducing an actual antigen into somebody's system. So I am very satisfied. I've read a lot of articles on it that there's been absolutely sound diligence in developing the vaccine.
Great, thank you so much. This is exciting to have this many questions. We love this interaction. The next question for you, Senator Dunnavant: what steps can the state take to improve the message on how to integrate updated data into the conversation?
I don't know. I've tried so hard to figure that out, and I think data alone without leadership is kind of what the challenge is. If you go on the Department of Health, God knows they've tried. I mean, I can spend hours on there just sorting through the COVID data. Even the weekly data that I legislated in the special session, I asked them to report. We talked earlier that cumulative data is really too hard to understand because you can't see what the patterns are. I wanted them to report weekly data. They're reporting that now, but you have to tab down to get to it. So there is an abundance of data right now. The question is, how do we act to respond in Virginia in the most fruitful way? And are we using data whenever we're trying? I think we get caught up in the data conversation and in conversations in general. What is the outcome we're looking for? We're looking for a healthy Virginia where we've contained the risk of something that's going to be around for a while. And we want to be able to respond where there are hot spots. Why don't I ever hear a conversation about that? If we know there's a regional aspect to this, the Southwest is in trouble. I'm talking with some of the health systems out there now. They really, most of the activity we have is out in Southwest Virginia. We actually have people being transported to VCU because they can't manage the volume out there. When we look at the data, we should be looking at the data for how do we solve the problems in the hot spots? How do we get respite expertise out there? Do we need ICU nurses? Do we need pulmonologists? Do we need facilities? What do we need out there? And I don't ever hear a conversation about that. I just hear about how many tests we've done that are positive. That is not a useful data point. So data is only valuable if it's applied in a way that it can improve outcomes. And that is the part that we are not doing. And I don't know how to get to the point that that can be managed better, but I think we're tangled up in process and we need to remember outcome.
Yeah, that sounds that's good information. And if you don't know how to solve it, I'm not sure any of us can.
Well, I'm going to
we
see.
write a letter.
I'm going to see about making a stink about the Southwest. I have a call coming up with some of the health system people out there, but I was speaking to a fellow legislator out there, and they were telling me last night it was bad and they didn't know all the details. And again, I can interpret, but if they really are in trouble, why are we not mobilizing resources? We should be working as an ecosystem. And if, you know, we should be transporting patients, or we should be getting people out to them if their healthcare providers are exhausted. That's the kind of leadership I'd like to see from the state.
Very good. Very good. We have another question. And we had this in our questions prepared. The question has to do with the recent outbreak that was reported at Hanover County schools having in-person classes. Is there a particular anomaly about that particular case, or is it like what you spoke of earlier, where it's not actually happening in the school?
I don't know the answer to that. I think that when you're this close to the holidays and you have a bunch of cases at your school, it's probably a good idea. You have two things. You have, you know, are we spreading at school? And the other is, are we, you know, or are we just having people that end up at school, or people that were in our classroom that are home and they call up and they say, hey, I tested positive, I potentially exposed your individuals. And so if you have the risk that there are enough people at the school that have been testing positive that you need to stamp that down. I think they only closed one school, but I apologize. I read a little bit about Hanover High School, and I know that that was closed, and I don't know the latest on that, so I can't speak to those specifics. I can to some of the Chesapeake schools because I got to see the outcome data there. And so, you know, I think that's what we should be doing. We should have in-person education. Let's make sure we talk about this. Virtual education is an incredible asset. And it is one that Virginia should have invested in long ago. I've carried the legislation for 4 years to have a robust universal virtual education in Virginia. And that provides not just the opportunity for a kid to be home and in, you know, alone in class, maybe because they need to, or they're sick or whatever it is, or in this case, because we're quarantined. But it also gives a universal platform with robust curriculum and robust different ways of teaching that curriculum to all of our teachers, even in the classroom. And so this is something that we should have made an investment in, and we've really struggled because Virginia didn't do that. Virtual education is an absolute necessity now. The problem is, so is in-person education for many kids. So I think this chant to open schools and have the idea that everybody's going to be back in school is not the conversation we should be having. We should be looking at that risk assessment and saying in-person school is absolutely necessary for kids who don't have broadband, for kids who don't have a safe place to be, for kids who need food, for kids with IEPs in many cases. In-person education is absolutely essential, and we need to find a way to do that safely. But that includes, as Hanover did, tracking it, just like they did. They did exactly right. They opened the schools. They've been incredibly safe. They've tracked everything. When they found out that maybe the viral load in the school was too high, they closed it. They said, we'll get back to you. Let's get it right. That's prudence. That's what we should be doing.
Yeah. And you sort of made mention to the fact that this time of year is sort of, you know, not necessarily the best time to have in-person schools because, you know, the little kids, they have brothers and sisters at college who are coming home, or, you know, and you have people who may have a relative or two in the house. And so things are a little bit different, where once we get into January, hopefully things will be tightened up again, and we'll see how that goes. When do you think that schools will be open on a large scale in Virginia? Do you have any sense of that?
I don't have a sense of that. And I think that in Virginia, constitutionally, the localities and the local school boards have the power to make that decision. And that was a, you know, constitutionally valued asset, that local government had the best access to those they were teaching, and they should have that decision. But unfortunately, I think that so many variables have been put into play. I think the governor should have come out and said, find a way to safely open schools or provide in-person education to kids that need it. He didn't set that agenda item. He came out and said, here's a whole new list of things that we need you to do in schools. And here's all the stuff the CDC says. A lot of that was conflicted. What the state wanted them to do is different than what the CDC wanted to do. And then they said to the school boards, go figure out how to open. And nobody could figure out how to open. And so that then has now cascaded into more of a political argument where there are people who want them open. And I've heard Fairfax say that they don't want to open their schools until there's absolutely no virus, zero virus in the community at all. That is, I'm not sure that's ever going to happen, ever. And so, you know, that's why you have to understand what is endemic, what is epidemic, what is the new normal? How do we make sure we can still get back to business, education, and activity and have safe mechanisms in place so that we can continue for education? Look, the kids that are missing out now, whoops, wait a minute. Somehow my battery is not coming on. So if I lose you, I'll come back and find you on my phone. But, and I kind of lost my train of thought there. But anyway, you have the basic idea. I think that we are now at the will of each individual school division, unless somebody at the state shows leadership, and you know that would require the entire legislature voting for it or the governor speaking up.
So you know, I thought about this the other day. So you have children who the primary age groups that I think about is a kindergartner who was going to school for the first time in 2020. A student was going to be a middle schooler for the first time, or a high schooler, or a freshman in college. All of those milestones that are so important. But, and I don't want to take our conversation down because you've offered us quite a bit of hope. But I was thinking about a child who is 5 years old and spent their entire first year of school in a virtual situation. And do you think that it's going to have a long-term effect on those children or other children? Are they going to have trouble with person-to-person communications, or how will it break down? Or I'm not asking you to open a crystal ball, but have you had thoughts about that?
100%. And again, this is somewhat intuitive. First of all, we know if children aren't reading on third grade level by third grade, they're very unlikely to graduate high school and be available to enter your workforce. So when you look at who is the biggest jeopardy we have for our kids are that K to 8 age group. The middle school and the high schoolers, first of all, don't need to have somebody in the home with them. So they can function at home safely and by law. But secondly, they just don't have as much social emotional development that they need, but also the basic skills. If you look at where kids are failing, most of the failures are happening in elementary and middle school. And so we've got to get those kids back as our top priority, which is why you saw some of the school systems stage them in first. But these kids are home alone. I cannot tell you how many constituents have called me in tears that their 12-year-old, they're all essential workers. One is a nurse's aide, the other works at Lowe's. They're at work all the time. The 12-year-old is managing the 8 and 9-year-old, taking the teachers' meetings, on the meetings. This is a crisis for our families. And we need to have in-person school available for those that need it. And the school divisions need to provide this because we are ignoring all of the other risks to our children. And our mission is, our obligation is, that's one of the sentinel obligations of the state, is to provide that education. And so I really feel very strongly that you're going to see a lot of legislation about in-person school. One of the things I will be carrying is a piece of legislation to have the state ensure that every child in Virginia will have an assessment of where they are in their comprehension and their performance for their grade level. This is now drilling down to individualized education. Historically, we've done tests in the classroom, we've done SOLs. SOLs are the measure of a school, not a child. But we need to know every child's going to come back in a different place. And if we don't figure out where every child is, and we don't make sure that we develop an individualized academic plan for them to get back on grade level, yes, you will have lost a generation of kids. And you know what else? This is the greatest injustice of all, is that the kids that are going to suffer the most are those that are already at a disadvantage. Because all the private schools are in school. All the parents that have money have their kids in pods or have them at home education, or they're supporting them. This is such an incredible injustice for the kids that we're supposed to be giving access to the American dream by giving them an education. It's foundational, and we have abandoned them. It's not okay.
And as you mentioned earlier, the data around abused children and neglected children is down. It's not because it's not happening, it's because the teacher is the primary person who reports that kind of situation. These children are at home and they have no outlet.
It's heartbreaking.
Yes.
It really is.
I would agree. I would agree. One of the questions that is also being asked is looking at the CDC versus the WHO. They're asking about the CDC, but there are these authoritative organizations that we have heretofore trusted in terms of as a resource for information and data. And they're asking, are on the issue of many people not feeling like they can trust the CDC. They don't make mention of the WHO. That was in the news as well. And they're asking about the conflicting information that we see. I hope I said that right.
I think we'd have to, we'd have to talk about what that was in particular. I mean, I think the big sentinel things that people say conflicts on, I don't know the position of the WHO versus CDC on this. Masks, I know they've talked about masks. Closures, it doesn't take a rocket science to figure out that if you're not getting people sick at businesses and at schools, we probably shouldn't be closing them, and we should be finding another way to decrease transmission. Or remember, the idea that we actually have actions that can control a pervasive virus is a lot of speculation. So, I guess we could all lock ourselves in our homes and do nothing, and maybe there'd be less transmission. But even when we did that before, lots of people that never left their home got the virus. So the idea that we have control over this entity is artificial. We have to control the outcomes. We have to make sure the fewest number of people are admitted to the ICU. Nobody is deprived of healthcare. That's why we closed down before. That's what the World Health Organization was saying. You close down to allow your supply chain to get in place so you never have to turn somebody away because you don't have a ventilator, you don't have a room, or you don't have somebody to take care of them, which is what happened in Italy. So the idea that we are controlling this with human behavior is speculative and probably not accurate at all. And I think that's why you see some of these conflicts. People have different opinions. They feel like I must do something, so I will do this, whether it's the state saying we're going to close, blah, blah, blah. But there's not science to support that. And that's why you've got to look for truth that resonates as simply clear and evident when you look at the data and you apply it to critical thinking. And the places we don't have it, we don't know enough yet. I hope that wasn't too obscure.
No, I thought that was great. I'm sure someone may ask another question, but we have a different kind of question I want to ask you. Dr. Dunnavant, are you going to run for governor?
No, I am going to stay in the Senate. I know there's plenty of people running for governor, but I love being a doctor. I am very, very committed to the idea of citizen legislator. I think every one of us should be. Why would we ever want professional politicians representing us? Look at how that's gone in Washington, D.C. We need to have people who every day are accountable to the public, that are in conversations, that are learning. I learn so much from other people that informs how I perform at the legislature. And so if I ran for governor, among all the other reasons I wouldn't want to run for governor, I would have to leave my medical practice. And I really love that. That is my life's work. And I am using my life's work to inform me as I serve the community in the Senate. But the Senate is not my life's work.
Very good. Okay. All right. Let's see. We have another question. Senator Dunnavant serves on the Education and Health Committee. what are your thoughts on the mental ramifications to continued separation and cancel methodology in our society? So I guess they're talking about adults, not just children.
About this cancel culture thing that people talk about, which I'm not sure I totally understand. I'll tell you my philosophy. I had an amazing mom, and you know, I deeply value every human being in human life. It's part of the reason I'm in medicine. And I think you cannot control other people's behavior, and it doesn't matter what you call them or how you label them or what you say about them. All you can control is what comes out of your mouth and how you say it and how you treat other people. And I believe strongly in being a generous, thoughtful, positive person in the way I tackle all of my problems. And so and those are the people I want to surround myself with. Am I often accosted or surrounded by people that my mother would be horrified to meet? Yes, indeed I am. But those are not the people I choose to be around. But I don't understand. I want to know where their mother was, but I still think that I cannot control them. I can only control me. And if more people believed that the power of realization and actualization was within, instead of them telling other people what to do, would have a different kind of culture.
Amen to that. And you know, my mother was a politician, but she was just like your mother. She was I remember one year she made me clean out my closet. She said, obviously you don't need all these clothes, haven't seen you wear them. Put them in the back seat of the car. We actually drove to someone's home she knew was, you know, poor. And she made me give them my clothes. I remember thinking, this is ridiculous. I might wear them. But she cared about people, and I love that. There was on LinkedIn, there was a celebration of a very young person who had achieved a monumental title or something like that. She just had a great victory. And the thing they said about her was how kind and how generous and how loving and forgiving she was. And I thought, you see, that's it right there. That's it. And you're right. That's the people we want to surround ourselves with. Well, we're coming up on the 54 after 12. We're going to be very respectful of Senator and Dr. Dunnavant's time. She's a busy lady. So if you have any more questions, get them into the chat really fast or just interrupt me. I have no problem with that. I think that, yes, please.
You gave me permission to interrupt, so I wasn't going to do it, but Dr. Dunnavant, first of all, I appreciate your response when you talked about running for governor and how, you know, we as citizens should definitely be a part of the legislature. That is very encouraging, so I appreciate that. My question is a little different than what the topic touched on, because I do represent a career college that focuses on skilled trades and allied health. And so one part of the question is what was your motivation for becoming a medical doctor? And as someone who is responsible for attracting adult learners into this field of training, what would you recommend as a strategy for encouraging adult learners to get into the health field, considering everything that's going on with the pandemic? So the first question is, what was your motivation in terms of becoming a medical doctor? And then the second question is, what strategies would you recommend for attracting more adult learners into the medical field in a somewhat non-traditional route in terms of getting education through a career college?
This is one of my very favorite topics, and I would love to have a whole conversation with you guys about this. Education, higher education, the continuum from really pre-K to workforce. I am all about, I have an idea about a portal that can help us get adult learners back in school so that we can get them new jobs. I love the idea of competency-based learning, where you can take an LPN or an RN and you can let them test for the classes without having to take the classes, because they've been doing this for 25 years and they really are pretty much RNs anyway. So I have many, many ideas about this. My background is my whole life loved science, loved medicine. I volunteered in the hospital. I thought the human body was the most amazing machine I'd ever imagined. I loved to figure out how it worked. It was amazing. And I started as a nurse. So I went to college. I was a nurse for 4 years and finally decided that I was going to do something different and went back to medical school. But that's an interesting question. I am more about how do I find the spots for kids to learn than I am about how do I get people to learn. We have a lot of programs at the state where we help fund getting back to school. They flipped how we're doing community college, so you can actually get a licensure or certification as your first entry level educational opportunity, and then build on that to get maybe your associate's degree and then your 4-year degree. So we flipped education. Instead of making them take all of the basics, we let them get a technical skill set from the get-go. So there's a lot of things that we're working on that, but technical education is one of my favorite topics. And so many people are never given the opportunity to do something interesting and valuable that they love because they're pushed to a 4-year school. 32% of our kids that go to 4-year universities drop out and never finish. And those are our people that end up with all of the debt. And then they don't have any way to pay it because they don't have a skill. So I would love to see us flip all of education. I would love to see so many more kids go get an associate's degree where they could be in a more supported environment with more advisors, learning how to be college students so they don't drop out and end up not finishing, and then go back and get the baccalaureate if they want to. So I would love to talk with you about that. Make sure you get the email is in here, but I'd love to see what you're doing too in Innsbrook. I'd love to come out and see what you guys are doing.
Yeah, you'll definitely hear from me, and I'll be reaching out. Thank you for that. And thank you,
Good.
Yvonne, for the platform.
Oh, absolutely. I'm getting ready to put Senator Dunnavant's address in case you were here earlier and didn't see, or didn't see it earlier. There is Senator Dunnavant's email address. If you get a chance to talk to Caitlin, she is delightful. We had a lot of conversations and so very responsive. So that is very, very nice. And Senator Dunnavant, I don't know, when you said I'd love to talk about that, I felt like, gee, I hate to stop talking to you. It's been such a wonderful, just so heartwarming. I mean, obviously you're just a smart cookie. You're very accomplished, but also just very passionate about what you do. And that's nice to see, especially in our government, but anywhere. But I wish you the very best success in what you're doing. And I think that at this point, you know, what the best thing for us to know is how we can support the initiatives that you have in mind. How can we do that?
Well, you know what? I will send you an update of what I'm going to do. My legislative agenda this year is going to be heavily weighted with issues for children. There are so many issues there. We have an audit review committee at the legislature called the Joint Legislative Audit and Review Committee. And the reports that have come out about foster care and IEPs and K-12 education and many other issues with kids are scathing. And for me, the issue with kids is exactly where we started. That is, we're not looking at the children and figuring out what they need to succeed or what the outcome needs to be, where they get to participate meaningfully in their own lives and society. We're looking at what silo pays their bills. Is it foster care? Is it DMAS? Is it education? And all of those are competing for dollars. And I feel like we've lost the mission for our children. And it's valuable to all of us. It's valuable to the workforce. It's valuable as a mom. It's valuable as human beings. And so I think that it's time for us to really take a good hard look at how Virginia is performing for her kids. And there's room for improvement. So you're going to see lots of response to COVID about K-12 and how we make things happen. You're going to find more information about how we make sure when kids get classes in college, they apply to their next technical level education or their college. No more dual enrollment where you don't get college credit. We got to stop wasting our resources. So lots of things in those venues and some others too that I can't think of right now, but I'll be happy to send something to you, Yvonne, and you can send it out to everybody. I'll give you a list.
Well, that's great. And we've been recording this conversation. With your permission, we'll get it out there to the folks who joined and also onto our social media so other people can hear about the many things that you're doing in the Senate and as well in the medical field. And I will say, I do want to end on a positive note. You just gave us a positive note, but you know, think about independent study in college, right? And how many people ran away from it because they didn't want to not be in a classroom with a professor. One thing I can say about these children going through this pandemic, man, they're going to be some independent folks.
Yeah.
If we can
Yeah.
do the things that you're trying to do to help them to be supported, then they're going to be ready to set the world on fire. And God forbid we have another pandemic, but they'll be probably better prepared than the adults that are trying to help them. So thank you again.
My pleasure. Merry Christmas to everybody. Have a wonderful holiday season. I hope you have time with family, but you're prudent about your exposure, and everybody go get the vaccine.
I'm going to get
Let's
it
get back.
after I
Yeah.
talk to my doctor. Thank you so much again, Senator Dunnavant. Please show your support for Senator Dunnavant. I'll go back to a gallery view so we can all get our emotions up there, you know, with just saying thank you so very much. And a little plug for next month on January 21st, we will investigate the Economic Development Authorities of Hanover, Chesterfield, and Henrico right here. Same bat channel, same bat time. And we will also in February talk to the Secretary of Health and Human Resources, Dr. Carey, Secretary Carey, and we will continue with just amazing speakers. But we have really heard from a wonderful part of our legislature today. Well, I'm so glad that you're there so you can do the things that you have in mind. And so thank you again. And everyone, Merry Christmas, Happy New Year, Happy Holidays, and blessings to all your families. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you. Bye, everybody.